we're all complaining about how hard Russian grammar was. And then he sort of said suddenly, and it really stuck with me, he says, oh, you guys think Russian is hard? You should try Korean.
안녕하세요. This is Mark Peterson with the Frog Outside the Well Research Center. Today on Zoom, I'm meeting with a good friend of mine, an old friend of mine by the name of Ross King, who you've met before, professor at the University of British Columbia. Hello, Ross. How are you?
Hi, Mark. Thanks for making time for me.
안녕하세요.
안녕하세요.
The purpose of meeting at this point is I saw some publicity about your Concordia language village in Minnesota.
Yes.
You celebrated 25 years.
Yes, we did. We launched soge Hosu, the Korean language village, in 1999 was the first summer. Yeah. I mean, the villages have been going since 1961, but so Korean was kind of a late addition to the mix.
Now, the villages means intensive language places where students, young students, you're talking elementary through secondary school.
7 through 18 is the primary demographic, age 7 to 18, so through high school. And they're called language villages. It's essentially summer camp. And one way to think of it would be language camp. So it's like any YMCA camp that you might go to in the summer, typical North American thing. And you do everything you would do in a summer camp, except that it's all done in the target language, and all of the staff are using only the target language, and the goal of everything you're doing is to learn the language. So it's a kind of immersion, and we call it residential immersion because you live with each other and you live with native speakers and you eat your meals together. It's just 24/7 you're exposed to the target language.
How long?
The food is Korean. Well, it depends on the age group. So, for little whippersnickers like age 7, 8, 9, they're typically going away from home for the first time a week. And then there's 2-week programs for all ages. If the kids are ready to be away from home, or if their parents are ready to be away from their kids, that's actually usually more of a struggle than for the kids. And then we have 4-week programs, which are high school credit. So we're fully accredited to provide the equivalent of 180 hours of high school instruction over 4 weeks. And so that's a real bonus for a lot of students, especially for languages like Korean, which are typically not available for high school credit in most American schools.
And you got into this through your own youthful experience with the...
Yeah. So I grew up in Wisconsin in a town called Eau Claire. And back in those days, in the early 70s, there wasn't much going on in Eau Claire, Wisconsin in the summer, and other than shooting up the road signs. And so my parents shipped me out and said, look, we want you to do something, educational over the summer. And somehow my mother found these things because they're in the middle of nowhere, as you know, up in northern Minnesota. But they get villagers, we call them villagers, from all over the US and even from abroad. So I started at age, I think it was 1971. I was 10. And so I went, I was a village hopper. I went to Spanish and then German and Russian. So until I went to college. So at age 18 was my last summer. And I was on staff at German for 4 weeks and at Russian for 4 weeks, actually 5 weeks each.
So is this what created your linguistics background?
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it's the one thing that I discovered when I was young that I was actually good at. And it sort of sparked something in me. Yeah. And actually, the dean of the Russian language village was kind of an inspirational figure for me, because it turned out I didn't know this until like the very end of the summer that I did like the high school credit program, I think for the second or third time. A bunch of us high school students who were doing high school Russian in the program were complaining to him at the sort of mid-session point where there's a kind of a slow weekend, and we're all out on the dock on the lake, and he's with us on the dock, and we're all complaining about how hard Russian grammar was. And then he sort of said suddenly, and it really stuck with me, he says, oh, you guys think Russian is hard? You should try Korean. And it turns out he was educated at the DLI. He went through the Korean full course at the DLI, I guess around the time of the Korean War or something. And he was a Korean speaker, but he just never once mentioned it. And that sort of stuck with me. It was kind of like threw down the gauntlet.
That was throwing down, I was just going to say, that threw down the gauntlet for you.
Yeah.
You want tough? It's Korean. Okay, I'll do Korean. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what he said. Yeah.
Interesting. You then founded the Korean program 25 years ago.
Right. So, I mean, I went to college in 1979, and then kind of forgot all about the language villages for 20 years almost, because I was just busy going to school and, got into this academic track. But then I think somewhere in the mid 1990s, the language villages apparently were sending occasional newsletters back to my home in Wisconsin. And my mother sent me an email one day. She had some sort of a communication from the German language village saying there was some kind of reunion, and she forwarded the RSVP email to me, and I wrote them back and said, sorry, at that point I was living in, well, I guess I was already in Vancouver, and but I was far away, and I was like, oh, I'm busy, sorry, I can't go. And then in my UBC email, sort of what do you call it, signature kicked in, which had me as assistant professor of Korean. And then 2 minutes later, literally 2 minutes later, I got a message back saying, we note with interest that you are an assistant professor of Korean, because it turns out they were just in the process of planning a new village, and they weren't sure if they were going to go with Korean or with Arabic.
Oh, really?
And so they said, why don't you come out and, take a look at the villages and how they've changed since you were a villager. And that was kind of really devious, because then I went back and sort of lots of really interesting memories came flooding back. And I just thought of all the possibilities, because at that point in time, as you know, the status, the state of Korean language education was just really, zilch. And I was really frustrated with what was available at all levels. At that point, I was already teaching the language, and I just thought this would be a great way to do something new and different that would actually help, bring more learners to the language.
One thing I've really admired about your career as I've watched you is the fact that two things. One, you didn't become a linguist who only did linguistics. We lose some people from Korean who do linguistics the way we lose political scientists who do political science. They go into the academic field and we lose them to Korean studies. You didn't leave. Number two is the way you have managed this language village for young people as a pipeline to feed us in the university. I've always admired the way, most of our colleagues don't deign to do anything with such young people. We're busy writing our research and writing our papers and all that sort of stuff. So I've really admired the way you've really devoted.
Well, I was just lucky that the opportunity kind of found me. But the other reason I was lucky was that when they did find me, as it turns out, I had tenure. If I hadn't had tenure at the time, it would have been academic suicide. But I was relatively secure in my position, and I just thought it needed to be done. And it's the fun. Those are I'm no longer on the front line, and Daphne runs the actual programming, and so but I did it for 14 or 15 years, from the very beginning, and it's a ton of work, but boy, it's fun.
Yeah.
And then we follow these kids. We're still in touch with them, and these are really most of the kids who go to the language villages are high achieving kids. They you have to be somewhat odd and different if you want to spend 2 or 4 weeks of your summer in the middle of the Minnesota North Woods doing Korean or Arabic or whatever.
Yeah.
So they all go to college, and many of them go to really good colleges, and they tend to pick a college where they can keep doing the language that they started in the villages. So yeah, you use the word pipeline, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. We see it as the entry point of a long pipeline. Yeah.
Well, the structure of Korean these days is quite successful. The Koreanists are the only growth language in the United States at this point.
That's true. Although I'm beginning to see signs that it might be slowing down, or sort of it might have peaked. We're just looking at our enrollments at the University of British Columbia for the coming year, and already this summer, for the first time, Korean has, not just Korean, across the board. It's partly because UBC changed its language requirement, but I just wonder. I haven't had a chance to check with other colleagues and other institutions, but I wonder if Korean hasn't peaked in a sense. I mean, I hope not, but it may well have.
This is the enemy, this is the end
Well,
of it.
yeah.
You can say, parlez-vous français, and it'll
Yeah.
translate for you. You can,
Yeah, but you can't have beers with your phone. Yeah. I mean, there are still people who want to have that personal, connection.
can't eat your
So
phone.
yeah, and you can't eat, etc. Yeah.
Well, tell me about the village.
Korean is the 8th village that they've built. It actually has its own year-round winterized facility.
And there are a total of 18 villages?
Well, 14 different languages. So in that sense, 14 different villages. But in terms of our own sites that we own that are winterized that can be used year-round, there are 8.
Which is a credit to what you've done, because when you started off, you must have been in borrowed facilities, and now you've built your own.
Yeah, so we were leasing, Bible camps, and YMCA camps, whatever. I mean, basically, Concordia Language Villages up until COVID. COVID was a really, really huge shock to the system, and we're still not recovering as an because it's a not-for-profit organization, right? So it depends crucially on fundraising, but also on just enrollment. So, kids pay a fee to come, but it's not for profit. And so up until COVID hit, there were about 5,000 kids a summer. And I think we're still only up to not even 3,000. It hasn't come back to full strength, even 4 years out.
I saw the Korea Times wrote up a thing about the 25th anniversary recently. Yes. And I saw in there that you've had a total of 2,500 students in the last
for Korean, yeah. So I mean, over 25 years, we've averaged 100 kids a summer. So we're still a small operation compared to, say, Spanish, which is the largest, or even German or French, which are traditionally the bigger enrollment languages. And right now, so this summer, which is our 25th summer, and it's the first summer in our new site, but the new site is only half built, right? So we've completed phase 1. And then we still need to build at least 2 more residences and raise money for that. And so we're not actually programming at full capacity yet. I mean, we're turning away kids because we don't have enough beds.
Once it's all built, how much of this is built now?
Well, almost 50%. So, I mean, now we got 2 residences, we got a dining hall, we've got a big administrative center, all of the infrastructure, the plumbing, the sewage, the electricity, the waterfront is done. All the infrastructure is there. And now the next phase is 2 more residences. We're in the middle. It looks like we're almost ready to build the centerpiece of the village. If you look on that photo, there's a kind of umyang symbol in the middle.
Yeah.
And that started life. The idea was to create something called a Hanmi Commons, where the Mi stands for both Mi국 and for Minesota.
Because I saw that. That's very
right.
clever.
Yeah, and so originally it was going to be we were going to cut down all the trees and make that space, but then we decided that was silly, and it's now become a Hanmi Supul, the Hanmi Grove. But the idea is that it gestures, to the U.S.-Korea relationship. It's meant to be a memorial space as well, because as you will know as an historian, Minnesota has kind of a special place in the Korean War. Because MacArthur made a point, he asked specifically to recruit soldiers from Minnesota because he wanted soldiers who were used to the kind of climate that they were going to be encountering in Korea in the winter. And so Minnesota, proportionate to its population, sent the most combatants, I think, of any American state, and also lost the most lives, I think.
And
I don't have the exact statistics, but anyway, Minnesota has kind of a special place in that history.
And thereafter, Minnesota has a special niche in adoptions. Right.
Well, then after the war, indeed, all of the big adoption agencies, especially Holt, were headquartered in Minnesota, because Minnesota for the longest time had very progressive pro-child, legislation. And so there was a lot of adoption. And in fact, there's a very sizable adoptee community, by which I mean not just the number of actual adoptees, but when these are families. And so when you put together all of these families, it's a lot of people. And that's actually what tipped the balance in favor of Korean as opposed to Arabic back in 1997 when they were thinking, what should we do? Because at that point in time, adoptions were still happening, in Korea, and there was a sizable group that sort of lobbied and said, we would really love to see this, be a Korean village. And so for a number of years, we had quite a few adopted villagers in the program, but they've all aged out now. Some are on staff.
And your population, they're quite
well, they're very diverse for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's actually, I mean, obviously the majority of the villagers across all of the villages tend to come from the Midwest, right? Because that's the closest catchment, if you will. And so when you go to International Day, where twice a summer they have a big International Day where all the villages come together, and you look at the other villages, you see a lot of blonde hair and blue eyes across the other villages, and Korean sticks out like a sore thumb because it's not just Asians and it's not just Koreans. In fact, Korean surnames are still kind of a minority in the village because Korean Americans aren't really willing to invest in Korean for their kids until the third generation, right? And so we have all these other ethnic groups represented, and white kids are actually in the minority in our village.
Oh,
it's
really?
kind of interesting. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, we've got a lot of Latinos. We got African Americans. We've had Native Americans. We have Somali Americans from the Twin Cities. We have people observing Ramadan sometimes in the village, because that sometimes coincides with our programming dates. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's a great cultural mix to celebrate Ramadan in the middle of a Korean language.
Right. Yeah. I know. It's really interesting.